Hi there, it's me, Melly of magicwithmelly.com, and I wanted to show you the behind the scenes to the designing of the logo for the Tree of Life Virtual Summit. I'm going to flip you around so that you can take a peek inside my sketchbook. So here we are, and this is the sketchbook that I happened to be using. I love this sketchbook. The only thing I don't love about it is when I use watercolor inside of it, the paper crinkles. So anyway, we'll flip open, and you can see I was working on some unicorn artwork. So these were kind of my initial sketches, and when I design logos, I design intuitively. So via sensing or responding to my environment or responding to other imagery, I just start following the breadcrumb trail and developing the mark. So you can see down here, this is kind of the traditional tree of life idea with the branches and the leaves and then the roots underneath. The idea came to me kind of this like knotted, not knotted as in constricting the energy, but intertwined symbology. And so I started working with that. You can see within the spiral, the idea of branching out, and then the idea of kind of like neurons and dendrites and connections that way. That concept moved into the idea of using the spiral as part of a tree, having that spiraling, radiating energy. And then the above and below, you can see I was playing around more with that. That led me more into the idea of starting at the center and spreading outwards. So you can see this is where the final concept kind of started to come in, where it's the idea of the leaves and then the roots reaching out, and then that intertwined connection. And the symbolism also came in kind of the idea of DNA, so those connections, that weaving around that then were growing into the connection, so spreading from inside to out, which is how we tend to grow as well. We grow from the inside out. So then we move over to this side, and you can see I was playing around a little bit more with the idea of having the leaves, having these 5 petals, because they're actually, in some reading that I had done, there's actually 5 trees of life, each relating to kind of different senses and the way we experience our world. So I started with the 5 petals, and 5 is also very important in terms of Metatron's cube and some other sacred geometry, and then spreading out. And then I was starting to play around with how to encapsulate this energy. You can see I've got these lines here as if there's like vibrating, growing movement. And then I actually had the idea of the roots, the abstracted concept of the roots outside of the container. So then we moved over here where then I brought the abstracted roots inside the container, and it became kind of that weaving. So then we move on to this page where I brought this concept a little further, and then the roots, as I had drawn out the roots, I actually realized that it wasn't just roots like digging into the ground, it was a blooming. That expansion has to do with blooming, so then the lotus came through. And then you can see I started playing around with type arrangements. I came over here and I started working with lettering, and this actually became kind of a preliminary concept that I ditched because it felt too, I'm not even sure what the words are, but it felt too contained, like this would not work with the imagery of the other page. And so I ended up ditching this, which I will show you when we get into Illustrator. But this was kind of the concept that I got to before I brought it into Illustrator, which again, we're going to go to in just a second. And then these drawings, like I actually drew a leaf, which I brought into Illustrator. I drew this shape, which I brought into Illustrator. I drew the lotus shape based on that wider kind of abstracted root pattern, which I brought into Illustrator. So I actually used my hand drawings in the final mark. So let's move over to Illustrator and take I wanted to show you within this folder, I just wanted to show you the drawings that I brought in. And these, I literally, I just showed you in my sketchbook. I drew them, I adjusted the level so there was enough contrast for Illustrator to pick these up. And I went ahead and brought this lettering into Illustrator as well. I ended up not using it, as you will see, but it was just kind of a fun, exploration. And I scanned this in as well, just for placement and so that I could draw these little shapes. And then I will show you what we did when we got into Illustrator. So here you can see that as I zoom in, this is the scan. I use a tool in Illustrator called Image Trace. You can expand the shapes, and then I could color these individual petals or something. This is one way that I like to work. It works with my style in terms of placement. And then what I did in order to create this border is I actually created what's called a pattern brush. And you can see over here, as I zoom in, you can see that I created this shape. This is just a drawn shape. And then I drew with the pen tool in Illustrator. I drew these other little lines inside, just kind of like that. So undo that. And then I created a pattern brush. And you can see over here, this was my final pattern brush. What you do to create a pattern brush in Illustrator is you draw a little invisible box behind your pattern, and then you drag it over to the brushes palette, which you can see over here. You can see my little brush. And then when you create a brush, once you draw a shape, I could draw any kind of shape and then apply the brush to it, you can see it tries to fit that pattern in the brush. And I've got my settings set so that it responds to whatever color I use. So I could use any, that's the inside color. I could use any color. But it worked really well for the circle, and then this became the border of the final logo when I applied that shape. And I would go in here, and I would just go in and make that smaller so that it fits. Okay, and then I just want to leave the strokes because I don't want to create a new brush. So you get the idea, and that's how I began to build the logo. So you can see up here I did bring in that hand-drawn lettering because I was playing around with that idea. That became a concept, which you can see up here when I ended up playing around with those leaves and adding those leaves to it. And, it's pretty, but it didn't evoke the expansive feeling that I was intuiting. And so that's when I moved down here and I began to focus really on building out building out the leaves, coloring. I had my single petal, which I showed you, and then from my single petal, see if I've got these in here. Yeah, I can show you here. So what happened with my single petal is I made sure that I had equally spaced petals, and I did that by coming up to rotate. So I can rotate. I knew I wanted 5, so I did 360 divided by 5 degrees, and then I made a copy, and so then you can see it copied it, and then I just placed these around the circle. So I have my individual petals, so that you could see them. I could make the fill a different color. And then from there, I knew that I wanted these petals to pop up in between. So I can copy that and rotate it. And I actually did the calculations for what the even rotation would be. But you get the idea. And then I came in and I knew I wanted petals to come in between here. And so I measured out, how many degrees that would be, copied the petals, and ended up with something kind of like this. And then I just came over here to my drawing and I placed it. And you can see here, down here, I was making sure that the lotuses, once I had my lotuses built out, these lines here were kind of guidelines for myself so that they were, roughly aligned with the petal and the opposite side of the, I guess, sort of a bloom, or tree bloom or something in here, so that I could kind of estimate a relatively even spacing of the lotuses. And then I came up here, I added the colorization. You can see here with the pattern brush that I applied to the stroke that there's petals behind, or the intertwined vine / DNA behind these lotuses. So I ungrouped this and I took those out. So it just became a beautiful intertwined and expansive piece. And then I came up here and I was playing around with the different colors within the leaves, different arrangements. I actually tapped into the Facebook Hive Mind to get opinions because I get too close to my work sometimes, and
Sometimes everything looks good to me. That's something nothing. Sometimes I shouldn't say sometimes nothing looks good to me. I have a hard time deciding when I'm so close to my work. So I settled on this font, which is Verlag, in both regular and condensed versions, and then I chose two different scripts to play with for the of. I felt like the condensed was really important for Tree of Life because of that extended character. So they're tall, almost as if they're growing and expanding. And so that became really important. And then we ended up with um, a version of this. I actually think this might be the final that we ended up with. And then I always save out files so that my client has the entire piece. My client has a version that's just the image, and my client has a version that is just the text, to give them the most flexibility for extending the branding into other products. And you can see over here I was playing around with creating patterns. So I started creating patterns to extend the branding as well. As you can see, and I can scale that down so that I'm just scaling the patterns, and I could say, so you can see how that pattern would look, at different sizes. And I can save it out at different sizes. So, that's a pattern that could be used in the backgrounds of branding materials that echoes the elements of the mark itself. So that is part of my process when I am building out these designs. And I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that that was very, very helpful for
So
you.
I hope that that was enlightening for you in terms of the process that any kind of mark or design, especially a design that's going to be the foundation of your entire business, which means you're going to use it on everything from websites to business cards to Instagram to social media accounts to workbooks to planners to whatever else you create. This is going to be the foundation. And so it's really important to me in my work and the way that I've structured my own process that my clients come away with something that is completely aligned, that is expansive, that is going to resonate with not only the work that they do, the depth of the work that they do, but also with people who are looking for that kind of feeling and frequency. Thanks for joining.